Okay, welcome everybody. So to today's webinar, I'm going to be talking to you about how to support you and your child to communicate more successfully. My name is Vicky Kears and I'm a speech and language therapist working within the autism assessment team in CAMS. Please do take this webinar at your own pace. You can pause it and come back to it whenever you'd like. And at the end, I'm going to be sharing some hopefully helpful resources that you can take away and have a read through in your own time. Okay, so the aims of today's webinar are to think about what communication is, why we communicate and how we communicate with others, the differences that we can see in communication skills between individuals, common barriers to successful communication, and strategies to help promote successful communication with your child. Okay. I just wanted to add this slide in just to have a talk about why we're chatting about communication today. So for those of you that do have a child on the autism assessment pathway, your child's information will have been screened and will have shown some impairment or difference in their communication at some level. So whether that's difficulties with their language or whether that's some difficulties with their social communication, so with interacting with other people and using communication for social purposes. And communication is so important because it helps us to interact socially, participate in activities, build relationships, make friendships, and make sense of the world around us. Okay, so let's have a think about what communication is. So communication happens when one person sends a message to another person. And for that communication to be successful, that message needs to have been understood by the other person. That message can be sent verbally or it can be sent non-verbally. So it could be sent through spoken word or sent by another non-verbal means such as sign language or writing. Okay, so let's have a think about the different ways in which we all communicate and in which our children communicate. And I've got a little list here, but that's not a full list. There are lots of other ways that we communicate as well. So for some of us, we might naturally gesture when we're talking. So we might use our gestures to add meaning to what we're saying. We might use our gestures to help emphasize something that we're saying or help describe something when we're having difficulties getting our message across. For some of your children, they might find using gestures difficult. They might not naturally gesture. They might be quite still when they're speaking and not really use their hands. Or we might get some children who really emphasize their gestures and they're over-exaggerated. We also communicate through facial expression. Facial expression can be really important when we're trying to communicate our feelings across to someone or how we feel about certain things. So if we're smiling, obviously that person will be able to know that maybe the message is quite a positive message, or if we've got an angry face or a disappointed face, then we can get that from our facial expression, not just the spoken language that's being used. Again, some of our children might find facial expressions quite difficult to understand, and they might not use a range of facial expressions themselves, so they might not have that extra method of communication there. Behaviour is probably quite a big one. I know quite a lot of you will be thinking my child uses a lot of behaviours that challenge, and what we say about behaviour is that it is a form of communication. They're behaving in a certain way because they're trying to get a certain message across to you. A lot of our parents will say that their child does display behaviours that challenge. That child might throw things, they might push people, they might shout and scream. And what we're saying is we need to figure out what it is that they're trying to communicate to you. A lot of the children that we see have difficulties expressing their emotions, and they might find it hard to know the sort of terminology to use when talking about their emotions, and they might not be able to explain actually what that feeling is that they're feeling inside. So they might resort to a behaviour to express that feeling, because if picking up something and throwing it on the floor is a really quick and easy way of, showing that they're unhappy about something. Why would they choose a more difficult method like speaking about their feelings when they could just throw something and that'll communicate the same message across? You would instantly know that your child was not happy about something. So they might turn to behaviours as it's a really quick and easy method for them. We all use behaviour as well when we're communicating with others. I'm sure if you've had an argument with a loved one, you might have slammed the door. That's a behaviour. That's telling that person that you're not happy, you need some time out, you need some space. Similarly, if you've ever been in a traffic jam and the car in front of you has suddenly braked, when you started going again, you might slam on the steering wheel, or you might gesticulate. That's a different way of using behaviour to communicate a message to someone when they're not able to hear you. So we all use behaviour. Some of our children might choose behaviour a lot more frequently than using spoken word because it's easier and quicker for them. Tone of voice as well, adjusting our tone of voice to reflect how we're feeling. If we're angry with someone, if we're really happy about something, our tone of voice as well sends that message across to them. And again, that can be an area that some of our children find difficult, and they might be quite flat when they're speaking, or they might not be able to pick up on the tone of voice of others. We've got talking on there, writing and drawing. I know we've had several parents come through the process and say that their child prefers to write down their feelings rather than talking about them. They find that easier to do, so they'll use that as their method of communicating their feelings. And similarly, we've had some parents say that their child's a fantastic drawer and they've drawn lots of different images, and the parents can tell from the kind of drawing that they've done how they're feeling that day, if that's a good day for them or a bad day. Some of your children might be non-verbal and they might use symbols or picture exchanges to communicate messages, or they might use some sign language to communicate their message across. So there's lots of different methods there of how we communicate with others. And just take a few minutes to think about how you communicate, which combination you might use to communicate certain messages, and then have a think about what your child uses and which areas they might find a little bit tricky. Okay, fab. So let's have a think about why we're communicating. Why do we need to send messages to other people? So we might need a need met. We might be really hungry and not able to make food for ourselves, so we need to communicate to someone else that we're feeling hungry and we need some food. There might be a toy or an item out of reach and we need to request that someone gets that item for us. We need a method of communication to do that. Similarly, we need to be able to give information. We need to have successful communication method to learn and access the curriculum. We need to have successful communication methods to build relationships and make friendships. There needs to be exchanges there of successful communication. And this one that we've talked about quite a bit already, expressing emotions. We all have different ways of doing that and different methods of communication, and that's a really important thing that we need to be able to communicate to other people. And last one, really important, to connect with others. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about communication development. So a lot of people appear to know how to communicate and interact with each other, and this is something that comes naturally to them. So I'm going to show you a video now of a mother and baby interacting, and it's a really nice interaction between the two and really shows sort of how early on a child is learning some of those communication skills. So I'm just going to share it with you now. And just bear with me while I get the right page up. And when you're watching this video, if you just have a think about what skills you think this child is learning from this interaction. Okay. Okay, so have a little think about what communication skills you think that child was learning. I'm just going to put the PowerPoint back up. Okay, great. So I'm going to show you the list and the things that I thought of. This isn't a full list again, so you might have thought of different things than I did, but I'll just go through the ones that I picked up on. So that child was learning turn-taking skills. The mum was very good at sort of leaving pauses for the baby to then add something to that conversation, and the baby was learning to take its turn in the conversation. The baby was using lots of vocalizations, which is really important for speech development. There was some really nice facial expressions being used. They were sharing smiles with each other. The mum was mimicking the baby's expression, and the baby was then mimicking its mum's expression back, so learning about the different facial expressions. Some nice use of eye contact as well, the baby using eye contact to engage with her mother. Some initiation of interaction there as well. When the mum held out her hands, the baby started kicking the hands to start a new interaction, and they started to then take turns within that. And then there was some really nice joint attention and listening skills being learnt there. The baby was learning to pay attention to her mother because the mother was doing really interesting things, and she wanted to pay attention to her. And as I say, there was loads of other skills being developed there, and I'm sure you've come up with some different ones. Okay. But I think what to remember from this is that although this comes naturally to some people, there are other individuals where it doesn't come as naturally to them, and it can take them a lot longer to develop those communication skills. And some of you listening might be thinking, that's my child, and actually they still haven't learnt some of those skills that were mentioned before, and that's okay. It can take some children a lot longer to develop those skills, and they might need a little bit more support with that. And I think what's important to remember is that everybody has their own unique way of communicating. There's no right or wrong way to communicate, but what we need to do is to be able to understand the way that our child communicates and adapt to their communication style, and that will help promote successful communication. Okay. So I wanted to have a chat as well about language differences. So language is thinking about your child's ability to use language, so to express themselves, to put sentences together, have a wide range of vocabulary, and be able to use the right grammar when they're speaking. And it also includes their understanding of language, so their understanding of the words and the sentences and information that people are giving them. So thinking about language development, we tend to see 4 patterns of language development. So your child might have had delayed language development. They might have been considered a late talker. They might not have said their first words at the expected age and been quite slow to build sentences. And they might have needed a little bit of support from speech and language therapy to bring them back in line with their peers. Or they might still have delayed language development, but they will catch up with their peers at some point. For some children, they might have difficulties with language, and they might have developed their language a little bit differently to how we might expect. And those children are likely to have long-standing difficulties with language, so they might need more support with their language and with learning as they get a bit older, and their communication partners will need to learn how to communicate with them in the most appropriate way and the best way that they're going to be able to understand them. Some of our children can have quite advanced or abnormal language development, so they might have been very early talkers. They maybe said their first words before 1 and putting phrases and sentences together just after 1. We've had some parents come in and say that they could have a full adult conversation with them at age 2, and that they were quite far ahead of their peers in terms of their language development from a young age. And some of those children might have had an abnormal way of using language, so they might have used a lot of language, but it might have been repeated from television shows that they've watched or things that they've heard people around them saying. And the 4th pattern is that actually the child might have typical language development, so they might meet all the milestones as expected, but they might have persistent social communication difficulties. If you do have any concerns about your child's language, so their understanding of what's being said to them or their ability to use language, then do consult your local speech and language therapy trust for some support around that. And for all 4 of those patterns, we might also see social communication difficulties, which is what we're going to talk about now. Okay, so some of the things that your child might find difficult, and that's not to say that they'll find all of these things difficult, they might just find a few of them trickier. So they might find it hard to understand tone of voice. They might not recognise when someone's tone of voice is sort of louder and more angry. They might not be picking up that someone's starting to get angry and notice that difference in their tone of voice. They might not be able to interpret non-verbal communication, so not be able to interpret someone's eye contact. We've had parents say that if you give them eye contact, they say, "What are you looking at?" And they might think people are staring at them all the time. Some children find it hard to interpret facial expressions, so they're not picking up when someone's maybe getting a bit frustrated with them, or they're not picking up on sort of cheeky grins, or that someone's maybe mocking them. Some children find it hard to interpret figurative or metaphorical speech, so phrases like "it's bucketing down" or "pull your socks up" they might find hard to understand. They might find it hard to start and maintain a two-way conversation, to understand appropriate social behaviour, to understand the other people's intentions, and they might not use less important language. So things like please, thank you, greetings, they might not see them as having a particular meaning or needing those within their conversations. So if your child does have difficulties with any of these areas, it might come across like this. This is how it might present for them. So they might appear argumentative or blunt in responses. So if they're not picking up on other people's tone of voice or those cues for them to stop speaking, then that might come across as argumentative, as if they're talking back to them. They haven't picked up on those cues that they need to stop. And that's that person sort of altering their tone of voice to say, right, I'm actually getting frustrated now, you need to stop. But if a person finds that hard to interpret, then that might come across as them being quite argumentative. Their eye contact might appear unnatural or avoidant. We've had lots of children that have come in and said that they find eye contact really uncomfortable, and some of the older ones have developed their own strategies for giving eye contact, whether that's looking at someone at their eyebrows or looking sort of at the corner of their eye. They might have developed their own strategies to make eye contact a little bit more comfortable for them. But for some children it just really is uncomfortable, or they don't feel the need in giving eye contact, so they can come across as avoidant in eye contact. For those that find it hard to understand sort of figurative speech, like pull your socks up, they might take things very literally. So if you told them pull your socks up, they might look down at their feet and pull the socks up, or say, "Mummy, I'm not wearing any socks." So taking things literally. We've had a lot of parents as well say that they have to be really careful when they're giving their child information, and if they miss information or they assume that their child would be able to imply information from what they've said, then their child can find that difficult. So they've got to give really clear and concise information so that their child can follow it literally step by step. Some children may ask or say socially inappropriate things. Again, if they're not picking up on cues from people that they're getting frustrated, if they're not picking up on their facial expressions or their body language, that actually that person's getting annoyed with something that they said, then they might miss that and keep saying things, and that can come across as socially inappropriate. They might keep on talking when others are not listening or interested. We've had a lot of parents say that when their child's really interested in something and they're talking about it, they can give quite a lot of detail and talk a lot about that topic. And again, they might not be picking up on those cues from their conversation partners that actually, they've had enough of the conversation, they're not interested anymore. that child might not notice that that person stopped looking at them, or they're sort of stretching or yawning because they're really focused on what they're talking about, and they might be preoccupied by their topic of interest. Some children might repeat back exactly what others have said, or statements off the TV or radio, which can also be called echolalia. So we've had some young people that have said that they sort of learn how to interact with other people by watching TV shows or films. So they might notice that someone in the film has gone up to someone and said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And that's their way of starting a conversation. So they might repeat that back exactly like they've heard, and that can be their new way of starting a conversation. And sometimes it can sound a little bit odd in different contexts, and sometimes some of the children might randomly come out with a phrase that they've heard and they're not able to use that in the right context. Okay. So let's have a think now about why we see these differences. So for some children, for some of your children, they might be experts on things rather than experts on people. So some children are curious about people, and some children are curious about things. So some of your children might know everything about trains. They might be able to tell you all the different train timetables in the local area, but not then know how to make a friendship. Some children might know every single thing about Mario Kart and be able to tell anyone about it and go into a lot of detail, but again, they might not be able to start a conversation with someone about a different topic. So some children are experts on things, some children are experts on people. And for those that are experts on people, they're the kind of children that will be watching what other people are doing, really paying attention and picking up on those skills without it needing to be taught to them. For those that are experts on things, they won't necessarily be watching other people, so they might be missing some of those key learning opportunities because their main focus is on a specific thing rather than on the people around them. Okay, other barriers to learning communication. Some children might have sensory sensitivities. The environment that they're in might be impacting on their ability to take in information. Some children might be really sensitive to bright lights. Some children might not like lots of noise around them. They might be overwhelmed by lots of things going on and having lots of visual distractions around them. So that's going to be impacting on their ability to take in information. Some of your children might show a different way of thinking and processing information. I know for a lot of the children that have sort of social communication difficulties or a diagnosis of autism, then the way that they process information can be very different to the way someone without a diagnosis processes information. And for those children, visual information seems to be the best way for them to process information. Because if you say something, that information instantly disappears. But if you have something visual, so either the written information or a picture, that's concrete and it stays there. So that's going to help that person really process what's being said to them. Some children have a desire for sameness. They don't like change. They don't like being introduced to new things, and that's going to impact on their ability to take information in. And some people are on their own agenda and they have a dislike of group work, and it can be really hard to get them on task and following your directions. Some children, again, engage in repetitive behaviours to keep them calm. So some children might rock when things are getting too overwhelming, and when they're sort of in that state and really finding things around them overwhelming, they're not going to be able to process information. And similarly, some children lack that communicative intent or that social interest. So they are the children that maybe don't want to be involved with the rest of the group. They don't seem bothered by interacting with other people. They're quite happy on their own. So it's going to be really hard for those children to pick up on those social skills if they're not interested in other people. They're not watching or getting that modelling from other people because they're interested in their own thing. So that's going to be a barrier for them learning those social communication skills. Okay, so let's have a think then about strategies to support and promote successful communication. So for those children that seem to have a longer processing time, these are some strategies that you can try. So it might be that you say something to your child and there's a long pause before the answer. Or you don't get an answer because you think they're not listening to me. I'm going to, move on and ask something different. What we say is that saying less is better. Really think of what information you want to get across to your child. Pick out the key information that you want them to take in and say it slowly. Really emphasize those key points. And if you do need to repeat it, then make sure you're repeating it in a similar way to how you said it before. Because if you think you've said something one way, so you've said, go and get your shoes, they haven't done it, and then you say, you say it again in the same words, that's going to help them to process that information and really stress what you want them to get. So go and get your shoes. Okay, to really emphasize to them what you're wanting them to do. Leave lots of pauses after you've said things to give them time to process the information, and using visual supports. I've already touched on the fact that some children process visual information a lot easier than spoken information because they've got something concrete in front of them. So if you're wanting them to do something or to take in something important, make sure you've got something visual there to help them take in that information, whether that's just a written list of what you're wanting them to go and get, or whether that's bullet points of the key information you want them to remember, or whether that's photographs of the place or the thing that you're talking about. Something visual to help them process what it is that you're saying to them. Some children have difficulty retaining information, so they might be able to process it and understand it initially, but then it can be quite hard for them to then remember and retain that information. So like the last slide, we're wanting to say less, don't give them as much information to have to retain, really emphasizing those key words. So use clear and consistent language. Okay, go slowly. Again, we need to give that time for processing. Showing them, so again, we're giving them visual information. We're not just relying on spoken language, and we're repeating important information. Another really important thing to do is ask your child to repeat back what you said, but in their own words. If they just repeat back exactly word for word what you said, you don't know that that child's understood it. You just know that they're able to memorize that information. We want them to be able to retain it, so they need to be repeating back to you in their own words what you said to them, so you can check that they've understood that information and they've taken it in. And we might need to do that several times throughout the day to check that they've retained that information. So if your child does experience sensory differences, we need to have a think about the environment that we're in. If we're wanting to communicate something really important to them, we need to make sure that we're in the right sensory environment. So if your child doesn't like a really loud environment, we need to take them somewhere quieter. You might have a child that actually they don't like the quiet and they need to have some background noise around. So again, you need to have a think about that. If there's lots of things on the wall that's going to distract them, or they've got their favourite toys around them, we need to move those out the way and make sure you're in an environment that hasn't got those distractions, because all of those things can take a person's focus away from what is being discussed. So you need to have a think about where you're going to talk to your child. Make sure the environment is safe and less stimulating. It might be better to be one-to-one with that child if that's a communication method that they prefer, rather than being in a group situation. So think about limiting visual distractions, having the television off, away from the toys, preferred activities, using a smaller room. So lots of things to have a think about. And your child might have had an occupational therapy assessment, and they might have information in their report about what sensory preferences do they have, and that might help you to have a think about the environment that you want to have when communicating with your child. Okay, for those children that have attention difficulties, so they might find it hard to focus on one thing for a long time, or their sort of focus might distract quite a lot and go to different places. We want to always make sure that you're using their name when addressing your child, so that they know that you're talking to them. Make sure that they're paying attention before you ask a question or give an instruction. And the signs that someone is paying attention will be very different for different people. So you need to have a think about how you know that your child is paying attention, and then make sure that they are paying attention before you're giving them information. Sometimes using their special interest or the activity that they're currently doing is a really good way of getting them to engage with you. So if they're paying attention to their train set or to a particular book that they're reading, can you use that activity within your sort of communication with them? Could you have a chat around what they're doing, or give them information relating to their interests? So get them engaged that way. You're using something of interest of them at the centre of your interaction. So taking language literally, if your child is someone that will literally follow everything that you've said, then try and avoid using irony, sarcasm, figurative language, rhetorical questions, idioms, or exaggeration. So trying to steer away from those sarcastic comments that they might interpret literally, or try and avoid using those phrases like "it's bucketing down outside," or really explain it to them when you're saying it. If you do use them, as I say, explain what you've said and be really clear about what you really mean to say. So if you want them to learn what those different phrases mean, you need to use them in different contexts and explain what they mean each time to help them learn what those phrases are. If your child is someone that sort of appears in their own world and in their own little bubble, you need to think about what is at the centre of their world. Because for you, the centre of your world might be your friends and your family, but for your child, the centre of their world might be their, their Xbox or their Harry Potter books, or their unicorn toys. Whatever it is that's at the centre of their world, you need to find what that is and use that as a way of interacting with them. So that's the thing that's most important to them. So you need to watch how they interact with that thing and think about how you can get into their world, whether you could get your own books and sit next to them and read with them and see if that gets their attention. Or if they're playing on the floor with a certain toy, could you get a toy and play with your toy next to them and see if they then start to engage with you, and then eventually maybe join in with that. So communicating with them at a way that's at their level. We don't want to put too much pressure on them. A lot of verbal information can overwhelm people. So really try and stay away from that and just watch what they're doing and join in with what they're doing and really pay attention to what's at the centre of their world. For those children that have the difficulty expressing their feelings, that might be because emotions are abstract. You know, your child might understand that a laptop's a laptop because they can see it and they can touch it and they know what it looks like. But you can't touch and you can't see happiness or sadness. It's a really tricky concept for some of our children to understand, and it's really hard to talk about our feelings sometimes. And as we mentioned earlier, behaviour is communication. So they are communicating to you how they're feeling through behaviour. What we want to try and do is help them and support them to be able to communicate their feelings in a different way, so that we're maybe seeing a reduction in some of their behaviours that challenge. So what we want to try and do is make emotions more concrete. And there's a number of programmes that have been developed for children that find this particularly difficult. So in zones of regulation, they have different colours that represent the different emotions. So you've got your green colours, that's when you're sort of at your baseline, that's when you're happy and you're calm. And then you've got blue emotions where you're maybe feeling a bit under the weather, you're a bit tired, you're not your usual self. So you might be below baseline at that point. And then we've got yellow and red, where we're sort of escalating, and it's those feelings of, you know, maybe starting to get a bit frustrated, a bit silly, and then red colours where we're getting angry and we might be yelling, and that might be the point where we're seeing some of those behaviours that challenge. So we're wanting our children to learn about the different emotions through using different colours, and that might help them to talk about it a bit easier or recognise how they're feeling through a colour rather than having to say the emotion that they're feeling. Similarly, there's the incredible 5-point scale, which uses numbers instead of the actual feelings words. So again, it's a number system, with 1 being sort of calm and relaxed and 5 being I'm going to explode. That's my sort of crisis point, where I've gone up the scale and I'm feeling really angry, and that's when I'm going to be displaying behaviours that challenge. So I will leave links for those at the end of this presentation so you can have a look into them a lot more. Some of the schools are implementing some of these strategies now, but also similarly parents are having a think about how they can use it at home. So different resources then that you can take away and have a read through, and I'll get the people that are ringing you to send these out in a link so that you can have a look through them in your own time. So we've got things like social stories, and that's a way of explaining a social situation to someone in a really positive way. So we're not singling someone out and telling them you shouldn't do this. We're trying to promote how to be in that social situation without sort of demanding them or telling them what to do. Comic strip conversations are a really good way of reflecting on a situation. So if something's gone wrong, or if there's been an incident, you can use a comic strip style conversation where you're drawing out what's happening to have a think through that situation. So you can talk about what was happening before, what happened during, and what happened after. And the good thing about comic strip conversations is that it encourages the child to think about how everyone was feeling within that situation, what everyone was saying, and what you think other people were feeling. And they might need a little bit of support with that, and that's fine. It's something that you do together. A lot of our children benefit from visual timetables, so something visual, so it's visual information that they're processing, it's concrete, and it's a way of explaining what's going to be happening that day or how you're going to do a certain task, and it's showing them in a visual way so they know what's coming up, and if there is any plans that change or any unexpected changes, it can be visually shown to them by using the timetable. So I know again this is something that a lot of the schools are using now, but a lot of our parents use them at home as well, especially during school holidays or times where things haven't been as structured. So especially during sort of the coronavirus time, when you're trying to get the homeschooling in place, or you're trying to put something in place every day for them, and they can be involved within that planning, so they can choose what they want to do, and you can give them the options that they have, so they're getting some choice within that. We've talked about zones of regulation and the incredible 5-point scale, which there will be some links for at the end. But what I want you to take away, what the key message is, I think you should remember at the end of the day, is that you are the expert in how your child communicates. You are the person that spends the most time with your child. You see day to day how they're communicating with you. Okay, and it's really important that you really try and understand your child's communication style. What is it that they're trying to communicate with you, and how are they doing that, and which ones are not successful? What messages are not successful in getting across to you? And then you can really work on that area and adapt your communication to support them, and try out some of those different communication methods. We're not just relying on one method, we're trying to use lots of different methods to help that child to communicate and help them understand you as well. Okay, so these are the links. I know you won't be able to click on these because this is a webinar, but these will be sent out to you as well, so you'll be able to have a look through these in your own time. So please do have a look through those. Okay, and hopefully this webinar has been helpful, and you've got some links to look through and things to take away and look at. And if you do have any questions, someone will be in contact with you to answer those questions. But thank you for listening, and I hope it has been helpful for you. Okay, bye-bye.